This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Hello, and welcome to the Photographing the West podcast brought to you by Flanagan Photos. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan. This is episode number 45. Today's guest is Charlie Russell, botanist, macro photographer, and blogger. Charlie has written some wonderful guides to wildflower hiking trails in California, plus Mount Rainier, Mount Washburn, and Yellowstone, and the Ptarmigan Trail in Glacier National Park. Welcome to the Photographing the West podcast, Charlie.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
You are very welcome. So tell everyone about yourself as a person, as a botanist, as a lover of flowers, and as a flower photographer.
Well, I'm essentially a retired business analyst and business blogger. So, my education is focused on agriculture. I have a master's in plant pathology from UC Davis, but I never went into that field. I got caught up in the new computer technologies that came out in the mid 70s. But I've always had an interest in plant sciences. So I was doing some casual flower photography, but I really didn't get started in that in earnest until the advent of good quality digital cameras. I went on a hike one time and had my one roll of 36 shots of film with me. And when we saw a beautiful place, lots of flowers, and we came back and found that I had misthreaded the camera and ended up with no shots whatsoever. And that was the turning point when I finally went to digital. And now when I take a hike, I'll come back with 500 to maybe 800 photos on a single hike. So, getting into digital photography is what really got me going. I've always liked hiking, and it's something my wife and I can do together. And we are both have backgrounds in the plant sciences. So, and then in my business life, I was most of my income over the last 10 years has been from blogging in the business environment. And so it was just a natural to start a blog for the wildflower hikes.
Yeah, I think everyone that's shot film has had the same experience that you had. So sounds very familiar. When did you actually start doing the flower blogs and the hiking blog and all of that?
I started that in about 2010. Again, I was making a lot of my income from blogging in the business environment, and so I had a very detailed familiarity with WordPress, which is the tool I use for blogging. Back in 2010, it wasn't always easy to find information about good places to go to see wildflowers. So as I did research and found this information, I said, well, why not just write about where I've gone, as well as what kinds of flowers that I've seen at each place. And I want to know things like, are there bathrooms there? Where's the trailhead? All things that are important to me. And so, it was a simple thing for me to write, to do the writing. And as time has gone on, my photography has improved. So it's a lot of fun. I guess it keeps me out of staying indoors all the time, and it gives me something to do.
Sure, understand that one. So you're actually blogging before most people knew what blogs were, I guess, huh?
I don't know that I'd say that, but yeah, it's I've been blogging in earnest since about 2008. Sometimes I think that blogging has become an old technology now with all the things that people are doing in social media, but in the environments that I work in, there's still a place for blogs, for things like this that go into detail. And then from my business and work, I learned quite a bit about search engine optimization, things like this, and that's paid off quite well.
Yeah, I would think so. That seems to be SEO seems to be the name of the game if you want to find readers or followers or whatever.
You have to work at it.
Yeah. Any particular tips on SEO for photographers and bloggers?
Be consistent and have a dynamic page, which gets into one of the advantages of blogging over a static website. If you have a static website where you just put up some information about your photography business and you have a few photos there, your gallery and stuff, that by itself doesn't necessarily generate a lot of traffic. You need to. That's the advantage of having a blog. If you're a photographer, if you've got an area of interest, write about it, because the search engines really look for dynamic websites that have information that's changing on a regular basis. And if you just put up a static website, you're not going to get the kind of traffic that you're hoping for. And then the other thing is to build links, and that's a dangerous topic, because you'll find people that'll say, well, we'll give you, for $100, we'll give you 5,000 links to your website. When you go through those types of services, those types of links aren't going to do you any good. What you want to do is do a guest blog post on someone else's blog, include links to other websites, do things that relate to the topic that you're doing, rather than just getting raw links from some service. And so that takes time, and most photographers are photographers and not, they don't want to take the time to do this. But if you want to build your business, you have to work at it.
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, that takes a fair bit of time on a daily basis and over years, I'm finding anyway.
Yes, it takes time to build these things up, but you just have to be persistent and consistent. And, it helps to learn something about search engine optimization, so you know about keywords and things like this. There are tools and plugins that you can get if you're working with something like WordPress that can help quite a bit.
Going back to your blog for a minute, one of the things I enjoy about it is that you have very nice descriptions of the hike itself, and you have the altitude, I guess, profile of each hike, which is helpful in deciding whether at least I want to do it or not. Thanks for doing that. I think that makes it very useful in addition to some very nice photos, of course.
That's something I learned how to do with my iPhone. I have an app that lets me record the track, and then I have some plugins with WordPress that display it. The problem I had in the past was that the hikes would be long enough that my battery would run out, and I couldn't record the whole hike. And so now I've learned how to extend the battery life and be able to recharge my phone as we're going along, so I can get the entire profile. So if you go back to the older articles, they don't have that, but I'm working on it. I'm trying to improve these things.
Good. Yeah, cell phone batteries are a problem, that's for sure, although they've gotten better in recent years, I think, with the newer models. So
yeah, they're getting better. And then I have one of those battery packs that's actually a case for the phone. So about halfway through, I just have to push a button and it recharges the phone as we're going along, and that works very well.
yeah, those are cool. I have one that I got for a overseas trip that I never had to use, but yeah, it sounds like it would be very handy. All right. You're a California guy, and from what I've read, it sounds like there are thousands of species of wildflowers in California alone. So how does anyone begin to learn them all?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to learn them all. Even the really experienced botanists don't necessarily know them all. So as time goes on, you learn certain plants that you're going to see on a regular basis. I spent a lot of time in certain areas, and so if I'm in the Sierras near Lake Tahoe or Carson Pass, something like this, you'll see a lot of the same plants multiple times, and over time you pick it up. There's resources that you can use to help. There are Facebook groups where you can post flower photos and get people to help identify them. There are websites that I use where you can say, show me all the flowers that have been identified in this particular area. It helps to have a background in botany, which I do, so that when I'm looking at identifying flowers, I have an understanding of the terminology, because there's some very specific terminologies. It does help to have that background, and it does help to be able to focus on certain areas. It's really a lot harder for me when I go to someplace like Washington or Montana or another country, because you'll have a totally different set of flowers there. You have to find different resources. So it does take some work, but it's something that again keeps me busy. As I'm retired, it lets me. I've got that extra time to do that type of research.
Sure. Yeah, for me, I always find that no matter how many guidebooks I have, the flower I'm looking at doesn't look like any of them in the guidebook. So I've learned to recognize some of the common flowers, but boy, it's a long ways to go.
It can be tough, and identifying things from photos that you bring back can be really tough, because there are features. When you're looking at this beautiful flower, you're taking these pictures and trying to optimize the attractiveness of your photo. But I've learned that I also will take pictures, and this is one of the reasons why I come back with 800 pictures and maybe only publish 20. I'm taking pictures of the underside of the flower, the backside of it, the leaves as they come out of the ground. You'll learn about the environment that it's in. Is it in a meadow? Is it on a rocky hillside or whatever? And so I'll take a picture of the plant in its environment, top and bottom views of the flowers, pictures of the leaves and things like this, because you can't always identify flowers to specific species without knowing this kind of information. I'm not a field botanist in the sense that I'm not always taking along my hand lens and all these different types of things with me in the field and pulling apart flowers out in the field to identify them. So I have to be able to identify these things back in, if I don't already know them, back at home in my office looking at the photos. It also helps to have an idea of what plants are in the area. And again, in California, we're very fortunate. There's a couple of websites that you can say, show me everything that's been identified by a botanist in this particular location. And that gives you a lot of guidance sometimes.
Okay, that's good to know. Maybe if you can send me a link to those sites, I'll put those in the show notes for everybody.
Yeah, I believe I did earlier on, but also on my website, I have a resources page. And on that resources page, I list the links to the websites that I use. The really big one for California is called CalFlora, CalFlora.org. There you can go in and do a search. You can search by name. You can search by family. You can also they have a link that says what blooms here. And if you click on that, you can draw a polygon in a particular area and say, tell me what flowers have been identified in this area. And it'll give you quite a bit of detailed information about that. You have to be careful, because sometimes, since that is a publicly updated website, sometimes there's some information that may not be entirely accurate, but it gives you a good guide to where you might find things. It's an invaluable resource.
Yeah, that's very cool. Most of your guides are related to California hikes and flowers, but you've also done some for Washington State and Montana and Wyoming. How's all that fit into what you're doing?
My wife and I like to travel, we tend to travel to places where there's natural history, where there's something to look at. We're not big on going to cities and things like this. If, like, for instance, we traveled to Norway last year, and when we went to Norway, yeah, we spent some time in some of the cities, but most of the time we spent out in the country, trying, hiking and looking for flowers. And we go on some guided tours sometimes overseas, to take us. We've gone to places like Crete and Estonia and places like this on botanical trips. So some of those articles haven't been written yet because it takes me. My preference is to identify the flowers before I get the article written up, rather than post the pictures and say unknown. So the overseas ones take a lot more research to do and time, but we'll go anywhere there's wildflowers to see, and as long as you've got the time to do it. Western U.S. is easier for us because it tends to be, it's within driving distance and a lower cost. But and obviously California is, since I live in Northern California, the majority of my hikes are in this area within driving distance. But we enjoy seeing new things, and we enjoy being out in nature. So we've got quite a few places we're going to.
I notice you don't have any hikes or guides for Oregon. How come?
There will be within another month or so, probably. The spring is obviously is a very busy time for me. We're out looking, we're hiking at least once a week, maybe twice a week, in different places. And like I said, I take 500 to 800 pictures from just a single hike, and I have to go through and process these, and I have to write up the articles. So I've got something on the order of about 5,000 to 8,000 pictures backlog right now that I need to go through just from the spring. We took a trip through Oregon. I have about 7 hikes that I'm going to be posting for Oregon that will be coming up sometime later this fall or winter when I'm able to catch up. I don't write articles that are okay, here's where to go right now. Something that says, okay, this week I hiked there. You want to hike there right, this week. I don't have those articles that say this is where to go this instant. I do have a Facebook page, and on Facebook I'll post current pictures sometimes, but that's not my focus. I'm trying to build feature-rich articles that have not only all the plants identified, but all, like you said, the hiking profile information about what the trail was like and things like this. And that takes some time to do.
For sure. Yeah, the joy of the digital age. We're all able to take thousands of photos, and then we have to sit down in front of the computer and process them and categorize them. So
yeah,
it's probably
actually I do have one article looking here from Oregon on Tire Mountain is in there, but like I guess I didn't create a menu option for Oregon specifically, so I'll have to update my website for that.
Well, I look forward to your Oregon hikes. I've spent quite a bit of time in Oregon over the years, so one of my favorite spots.
We found some really interesting places, and the only problem up there is figuring out the timing around weather. We started off in beautiful weather, and then the last hike our last hike was cut off because it started actually snowing on us in June, and then that snow turned to hail, and that made it really hard to get good pictures of the flowers as they were getting beat up there. So
yeah, I would think. So you must have been up in the Cascades somewhere, huh?
we started off in Southern Oregon, some really interesting places, $8 Mountain, which is a special botanical area, and we worked our way up. We were up past Corvallis and several places along the way, and there are some beautiful places up there, and it's fun to see a different set of flowers than what we see. Hiking in the Sierras in California, you see a lot of the same things, and when you go to a new area, then it makes it tougher because we have to learn new flowers, but it's also exciting to see things we haven't seen before.
Sure. You've written a nice post about the Dead Horse Creek Trail, which is one of my favorites at Mount Rainier, and so that was brought back some nice memories. So tell people about that and about the Mount Rainier Wildflowers. That's a great place to go at the end of July or first part of August, I believe.
Yes. I'd visited Mount Rainier when I was a kid with my family, and I remember the gardens of flowers that were there, just masses of flowers. And this particular trip, my wife and I took along my 12-year-old grandson because we want to expose our grandkids to a national park, and we ended up in Mount Rainier for a variety of reasons. We also visited Mount St. Helens on the way up there, which is an article I'll have out very shortly. Mount Rainier, if you hit it right, is just a phenomenal place for wildflowers. I always joke with my wife that when I get too old to hike, I'm going to write a book about roadside wildflowers. So we could just drive along, and I'll lean out the window with my telephoto lens and take pictures along the roadside. And Mount Rainier would be a great place for that. There's just tremendous numbers of wildflowers right at the roadside. Some of the hikes that you take, some fairly easy hikes, relatively easy hikes, of a few miles, you can see just a huge number of different types of flowers. And when we were there, we hit the peak of the avalanche lilies, and we have photos of some of this area where there's just acres and acres of these beautiful white lilies. It was a wonderful trip, and we happened to hit the weather perfectly, and some nice clouds over the mountains, so the mountains were very photogenic and a very enjoyable time. I highly recommend, if you're interested in wildflowers, that's a place to go if you hit it right. Nice thing about Mount Rainier is that there's a lot of elevation change throughout the park. So when you go there, there's going to be some elevation where the flowers are blooming. If you come early, the lower elevations are doing well. If you come a little bit later, you move up the mountain. This is just within a few miles of each other. You can find all this variety.
Yeah, I think it's well to point out for people that might have an interest in doing that it's a very busy park, and it's one, it's well to get your reservations early, and two, it's well to get there early in the morning because the parking lots, particularly around the visitor center, are just packed, let alone the road going down from the visitor center. So if you want to avoid the crowds, you got to get there early and try to find some place that's close to where you want to be, because the distances involved in getting anywhere in the park are quite long and time consuming. So word to the wise.
Parking was a problem. We were staying at a place just outside the park and were able to get there early, but on the weekdays, you only had to go around the parking lot a few times to find a spot to park. On the Saturday that we were there, we were very fortunate that we were there very early in the morning, and it was horrendously difficult to park at the main area. But there's a lot of good places to hike that aren't right there at the visitor center that were very beautiful also. Yeah,
I should have mentioned that on weekends the visitor center is an absolute zoo, so if you can go during the week, even better.
Yes.
So you've also done a couple hikes in Glacier and in Yellowstone. I was interested to see or to read the one on Mount Washburn. I hadn't thought about going there for wildflowers, but it's a great place to go for grizzlies at the right season. I see that you managed to miss the grizzlies, but did get some wildflower experiences there.
Yeah, it was in a way disappointing. We only saw one grizzly on our whole trip in that general area, but and it wasn't very photogenic because it was so busy eating berries. All you saw was his back. You never saw his head.
Mhm.
The Mount Washburn's pretty high, so we were there past the best wildflower season at the lower elevations. You do the same thing that we do in California if you just follow the bloom up the mountain, and Washburn was very interesting. I actually have some other hikes in that area that I just haven't gotten around to haven't caught up with identifying the flowers. Yellowstone's is a very interesting place, but Glacier National Park was one of those. I put it on a par with Mount Rainier as one of the fantastic places for wildflowers. And the Skyline Trail there at the high elevation was actually a very easy trail because even though it's at high elevation, there isn't a lot of elevation change in the hike itself. You're essentially going along the cliff edges, straight across rather than going up and down mountains, and fantastic wildflowers there. Just an amazing place. It's been a couple of years since we've been there, so I'm not sure how climate change is affecting things up there. I know that there's some big wildfires this year that closed down some of those areas, so I'm not sure how things stand up there now, but it was an amazing place to visit.
What time of year were you there?
That would have been July, more or less. And again, that's one of those places where there's a lot of elevation differences in the park. So if you come earlier, you start at the lower elevations. Unfortunately, those lower elevation hikes tend to are very again, like Mount Rainier, they're very crowded. Another interesting place was Rocky Mountain National Park, which again I've got this backlog of photos from prior years. I haven't gotten through all these things. Rocky Mountain National Park is another place. There's wonderful places for hikes for wildflowers, and again a lot of elevation change in the park. So if you come earlier, you start at the lower elevations, and later in the season you go up to the higher elevations. And it's also a very crowded park, although the areas that have the beautiful wildflowers tend to be less crowded because people are looking more for the animals, for the wildlife, and those tend to be on the eastern side, closer to where the populations are. The wildflowers are best on the west side, and that's further away from the big cities and less traveled. So that's an interesting place that I hope to get some articles written about that in the near future.
Good. Yeah, it's a great spot. So with all this hiking that you're doing, what kind of equipment do you take with you so you don't overload yourself?
Yeah, that's a problem because again, as you get older, it's the amount of equipment I want to carry with me is I don't carry as much as I used to. I don't carry a lot of equipment when I'm doing hikes. I have two cameras. Actually, I have one camera. My wife has one. I shoot with right now I'm using a Nikon D7000. The reason I like that is because it's a ruggedized camera. It's a magnesium frame. It's weatherized. It's very rugged because I'm kind of rough on my equipment. I'll take a lightweight tripod. Usually I'm taking a Gorilla Pod, which is a very short, it's only got 10-inch long legs, so it's good for getting down low to the ground on things. And my backpack, where I'm carrying the just small equipment that I use for doing things. One of the things I like is I have a shoulder clip called a Capture Pro camera clip from Peak Design, and it's a clip that attaches to the shoulder strap on my backpack and allows me to I hang my camera on that and it locks it in. So as I'm hiking, my hands are free and I don't have a camera on a strap banging around, but I don't have to put it in the backpack to hide it away. So I can just grab it off of this clip on my shoulder and take a picture quickly, and that's a very useful thing. I don't carry a lot of other equipment. I may have a couple of some cloths for some dark backgrounds, things like this, but pretty much it's the camera and the equipment I use to carry it, and a short tripod. My wife kind of laughs at me because I carry these tripods all over the place, but I will often not use them. I'm very good at taking close-up pictures without the tripods. I've learned how to use a 3-point position where I'll have, I brace with my arms and my knees and things, and I have certain ways to stabilize myself. I spend a lot of time working on getting good depth of field. I think my photography would improve if I used tripods a lot more, but we're out hiking. There isn't a lot of time to set up things. It's just something that I need to improve. I do a lot of photography in my local area, and there if I'm looking at something in a vernal pool ecosystem that I work with locally, I'll use a lot more equipment. Then I have a wind box that a box of plexiglass that I can put around my subject. I have then I'm using I have a device called a cam ranger, which attaches my camera to my iPad, and I can set my camera on my GorillaPod, on my tripod inside this box, and control the camera from outside, because the area where I do a lot of my work locally tends to be very windy. This allows me to control the camera, and in fact I do focus stacking with this, where the cam ranger, I can say I want five photos here, and it'll take the 5 photos and advance the focus incrementally, so I can get good shots for focus stacking. So I use a lot more equipment if I'm not out hiking.
Yeah. Well, tripods are both a necessity and a bane particularly when you're hiking, but nobody's come up with a good solution for that. The vibration reduction or image stabilization, if you're a Canon user, certainly has gotten much better over the years, but you'd have to be real steady like you are to be able to do that for macro photography, I would think.
Yeah, the image stabilization often doesn't work when you're doing macro photography. Sometimes that actually gets in the way of things. If I was doing the type of photography like what you're doing, with where your focus tends to be on landscape shots, I absolutely would be using a tripod. The type of work like a photographer like yourself, I'm always amazed at how good the landscape shots come out compared to what I do, and I know that a lot of that's because I'm doing handheld shots and not taking the time to do things. The macro photography, it's something that you just learn how to do. I'm not taking pictures of insects and very small things that have a lot of depth. There's a lot of little tricks in how to get those macro shots to work out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I'm happy to be able to get flowers that identify what's there. And that's the primary purpose, is to say, here are the flowers that we saw on this shot. Getting into shots that are the pretty shots, the art shots, things like this, that's something that's a newer thing for me, and it's an area where I'm working on trying to learn photography, because when I'm talking to photographers, I'm a botanist that's learning photography. If I'm talking to botanists, I'm a photographer that's learning botany. But yeah, it's things that I'm learning how to do.
Sure. What lens do you use, or lenses, for your macro work?
My primary lens is a Nikkor 60 millimeter macro. I'm thinking of playing around with 100 millimeter or so. I've seen some good results with that. But the advantage of shooting flowers versus shooting, insects or animals or things like this in macro photography is that the flowers don't move a lot, and as long as it's not a windy day. I can get real close with my 60 millimeter, where if I was shooting insects or things like this, I need to be further back, and a longer macro lens would probably help. The Nikkor 60 millimeter macro lens is it's a very sharp prime lens that does a really good job for me, and it's relatively lightweight and works very well. I also carry a Nikkor zoom, an 18 to 200 millimeter zoom that I use for a lot of the landscape shots I'm doing. That's why we have two cameras. I don't like to switch lenses in the field if I can avoid it. So I have that on my wife's camera, and if that bear walks by, then we can zip that out and get a quick shot. And that's a very useful one. It isn't as sharp at the far ends of the zoom range, but it's a very convenient length for carrying with you, and it's not one of these huge, it's not a huge lens, so it's lightweight enough for us to not burden us. And those are the two lenses I primarily use.
Yeah, I have a Nikon and 200 millimeter macro lens that I like because I'm not able to get down as low as you apparently do. So
I'm down on my hands and knees a lot, and in fact, that's another piece of equipment I should mention that's really been very helpful is a pair of foam rubber volleyball knee pads.
right.
These foam rubber volleyball knee pads, I slip them on and I can hike in them. They're not chafing. They don't have a hard plastic shell or something that would rub or knock. I wear them underneath my jeans and hike miles and miles in them, and that really helps because there's time. We were hiking one time in near Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in the Sierras, and near the end of this hike, it was getting the temperatures were getting into the hundreds, and there was this big granite shelf there that had granite sand scattered across it. When you're with granite rocks, you get these crumbled pieces of rock there, and it's just kind of sand. And here's this wonderful Mariposa lily out there in the middle of the granite. And I had to get the shot out in the sun. The surface temperature is probably like 120 degrees or higher, and it's this hard granite with sand on it. And kneeling on that, I thought I was going to destroy my knee. So now I have these knee pads, and it really, really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a must for macro photography. I hadn't thought about using volleyball knee pads, but that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, they're low cost. They give you a little support. It's a little bit of compression support for your knees, which I find helpful. The only problem is that a lot of times, since they are foam rubber, there's a lot of times I'm shooting in wet environments and near edges of lakes or streams, and they do soak the water up. So, you have to, if you're taking pictures of flowers, you have to be willing to get down in the dirt and I come back, my knees are I'm muddy, my elbows are muddy, my hands are dirty. This is another reason why I like this particular Nikon camera, is that it can take getting splashed with some mud and stuff, and it doesn't affect it. I get down and close to
dirty, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I can get down. It's getting up that's my problem. But anyway, that's another issue.
That's the problem as you get older. It's getting harder, but we just take our time.
Sure. So you mentioned using focus stacking software. Is there one in particular that you like?
I'm bouncing between two different things. I can do focus stacking with Adobe Lightroom. I use Lightroom quite a bit for adjusting the exposure. and for cropping of photos. Lightroom has some features that can be used to do stacking, but sometimes the result, you don't have as much control over it as I'd like to, but it's simple to use. The other software I'm using is Helicon Focus. Helicon Focus is a more detailed focus stacking product. It gives you quite a bit of control over what you're doing, but it takes a lot more work to get it. I'm still working on getting a good workflow with that, trying to find some ways to make it take less time. One of the photos that I sent to you was created with Helicon Focus, and the focus part of the focus stacking is very good, but there's sometimes a tendency to get a little bit of color alteration when you do this, and that's a tricky thing, is to get it to look like it's an accurate photo, not one that looks like it's processed, and it's an area that I'm still learning. I don't do focus stacking when I'm out hiking because it takes too much equipment to do that. The focus stacking is in my local areas where I can haul my equipment out there with me.
So when you're doing focus stacking, I'm guessing you use a focusing rail or not?
No, that's where I'm using the Cam Ranger product, which again, this connects my camera to my iPad through a Wi-Fi connection, and once I can control all features of my camera, the f-stop and the ISO ratings and everything can be controlled through the iPad. And then I'll say, okay, I'll set the focus on one end of the range, and then I'll say, I want you to take 6 photos, and with a medium range, for instance, and it'll take the shot, advance the focus, take the shot, advance the focus, and give me that series of shots. It can be a little tricky. You have to do things a certain way to make it work right, but that works a lot easier, and I don't have to physically touch the camera at all. I'm connected to the camera through a Wi-Fi connection on my iPad, and that works very well. It's not something I do a huge amount of because of the equipment involved, but the wildlife area that I spend a lot of time in, which is Jepson Prairie, is a vernal pool area, and there's most of the flowers are no taller than 6 to 8 inches, so they're down low to the ground, very short-lived annual flowers. So it gives I can set my camera on this very, very low GorillaPod, very stable of tripod, and I set it up inside I have a wind box, which is a box made out of plexiglass sheets that are taped together that I put around it, and it's something. It's a different kind of art than what I do when I'm doing hiking. It's a different kind of process.
Yeah, indeed. For those people who aren't from California, tell them a little bit about Jepson Prairie.
In California, we have a geological feature called vernal pools. These are actually found throughout the world in many places, but the vernal pools in California are very unique in that there's a vernal pool essentially is a pool that forms when you have an impenetrable layer of some sort, like a hard pan or a clay pan layer, and the water table builds up on top of that, and you have water in this pool for a short period of time in the spring. As the pool dries down, you get concentric rings of flowers that bloom here. Not always concentric rings; it depends on the location. While these types of formations are found around the world, and usually in Mediterranean climates, the ones in California are interesting because of the high diversity of native plants that are there. Where if you go to Turkey or Spain or New York, which there are some there, you'll find 2 or 3 species of flowers that are very specific to vernal pools. In California, we have something on the order of 300 different species of plants that are found only in these vernal pools, and it's a feature that's that we're losing in California as farmland and cities are developed in these areas. These very unique areas are disappearing. Jepson Prairie Preserve is a place near Dixon, California, which is partway between San Francisco and Sacramento. And this was purchased originally by the Nature Conservancy. It's now owned by the Solano Land Trust, and I'm a docent there. I help lead tours of the place in the spring. In a good year, we get phenomenal explosions of color out there for a very short period of time. We're there from March through the middle of May, and there's also many unique animals that live. Several endangered species of animals that live in these ponds that we can show. It's just a 30-minute drive away from my house, so I spend a lot of time out there documenting the types of plants that are there throughout the season. There are some other vernal pool areas nearby that are on areas that aren't publicly accessible that I've gotten permission to go to, and I'm spending time documenting the plants that we're finding there, and I've done some posters for the on one of them for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we're trying to document the plants that are here and perhaps open these areas up to the public at some point in time.
If I remember right, it's quite a large preserve and quite unique.
It's a very special place. There are some plants that were identified at this place that exist only 4 or 5 pools in California. The size depends on what you're comparing it to. You know, it's 1,600 acres is not a lot when you consider how many hundreds of thousands of acres there used to be in California of these types of places. But it's a very unique place, and we're very fortunate to be able to take the public and tours out here. Part of it's open to the public all the time. As the season progresses, the flowers move into areas that aren't open to the public, but as tour guides, we can take people to any place where the flowers are blooming on the site. So we do tours middle of March through middle of May on Saturday and Sunday, every Saturday and Sunday.
So do those fill up pretty quickly? Do you have to reserve, or?
Don't have to reserve. It's just who shows up.
Okay.
We ask for a $5 donation, but it's whoever shows up. So, you know, some weekends we'll have 5 people. Some weekends we'll have 60 people. If we have 60, we have several docents there. We'll split them up into groups, and you know, we find out if some people don't mind walking some distance, we'll take them to one place. The people that can't walk a long distance, we'll take them to a different place.
Okay, sounds like a good spring place to visit.
It is. Early to mid-April is usually the best time for the best bloom. I can find good flowers all the way from February through end of May, but the really spectacular displays tend to be around mid-April in a typical year. And I'm not sure what a typical year is anymore, because you know, the rainfall, we've had such odd rainfall patterns over the last several years that it's hard to know exactly when the best time to go is.
Sure. Well, I was going to ask you about wildflower guides, but it'd probably be better if I just put those in the show notes. You've got several that you recommended, I know. So I will do that, or they can look on your website, which will also be in the show notes. So where can people find you, your blog and your hiking guides and everything that you're doing flower-wise?
I have 2 websites. One is ibreakforwildflowers.com, is one where I tend to post the best of the flower shots, but it also links over to my wildflower hike site. The wildflower hike site, unfortunately, I have a long name for that one. It's wildflowers.russellramblings.com. And so it's easier to go to ibreakforwildflowers.com, and then you can link to the hikes place from there.
Well, Charlie, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for being on the podcast. Check out our show notes to see a few of Charlie's beautiful wildflower photos and links to his websites and his recommendations for flower guides and all those things we've mentioned. The Photographing the West podcasts are published on the 15th and 30th of each month on iTunes, most RSS feeds, and on my website at www.flanaganphotos.com. Photos spelled Photos. So thanks for listening. Please leave us a review on iTunes or whatever RSS feed you use. And bye for now, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.